The night was cold, and the billionaire sat silently in his marble-floored study, staring out at the glittering skyline that seemed to bow before his wealth. On the surface, he had everything: power, fame, an empire carved out of steel and sweat. But inside, a quiet ache gnawed at him. People adored his money, not him. Love, trust, loyalty, these words had become nothing but shadows. So he devised a test, a simple yet revealing test. He placed his black credit card, limitless and powerful, on the polished oak table and invited 3 women from his life. One was his longtime business associate, sharp-eyed and always draped in designer gowns. Another was a socialite who never failed to charm rooms with her laughter, her beauty masking a heart he never fully understood. And the third was someone no one ever noticed, his maid, quiet, humble, often invisible in the grand halls of his mansion, yet her silence had always carried a strange kind of warmth. He leaned back, clasping his hands. Take this card. Use it for anything you desire. No restrictions. Buy whatever your heart tells you to. The associate smirked, her red lips curving like a blade. The socialite's eyes glittered with excitement, already mapping out luxury boutiques in her mind. But the maid, she looked at the card as though it was a burden, not a prize. Within hours, the results began to unfold. The associate returned with contract for a luxury villa and jewelry worth millions. The socialite came back boasting of private jets, designer bags, and an exotic vacation package for herself and her circle of friends. Both women glowed with greed disguised as entitlement. But when the maid returned, her arms weren't weighed down with shopping bags. Instead, she carried something that startled the billionaire, a single small package and a faded receipt. He frowned. That's all. Her voice trembled, yet her words carried an honesty that pierced through the polished air. I went to the orphanage in the old district. The roof leaks, the children sleep on broken beds, and their meals are never enough. I bought them blankets, food, and books with your card. And this, she held out a worn leather photo frame with a picture inside. It was a photograph of him, taken years ago, standing in front of the orphanage where he had grown up. His heart skipped. The children in that picture were his family once, his brothers and sisters of circumstance, all scattered by time and fate. How did you know? His voice cracked, the mask of the billionaire slipping. The maid lowered her gaze. Because I was there too. You left before me. But I never forgot your face. You built empires. But those children, they still wait for someone to come back for them. His chest tightened with a pain he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in decades, his wealth felt meaningless, his empire hollow. And as he stared at the maid, he realized she had given him something neither diamonds nor jets could buy: truth. He sank into silence, his mind unraveling with memories he had locked away. The 2 other women watched with impatience, failing to understand the weight of what had just been revealed. But for the billionaire, the world would never look the same again. He looked at the photo frame again, his fingers trembling slightly as they traced the edges. Dusty memories resurfaced. Nights when he and the other children huddled together under torn blankets, whispering stories to distract themselves from hunger. The rain had always leaked through the roof, cold water dripping onto their thin mattresses. Back then, he had sworn to himself that one day he would rise. One day he would never be weak or forgotten again. And yet, here was his maid, reminding him that he had climbed so high he had forgotten the very ground that once held him. The associate shifted in her seat, clearly annoyed by the sudden turn of emotion. Well, she said briskly, this is touching, but surely you didn't give us your card by blankets. You wanted to see ambition, didn't you? Vision. I invested in assets that will appreciate in value. That is how one builds a legacy. The socialite giggled, waving her manicured hand. And I think we all know what life is for. Pleasure. He doesn't need anyone to remind him of the past. He's worked hard. Now it's time to enjoy. And with me, he can have joy every day. We could be the power couple the world envies. Their words fell flat in the room, bouncing against the billionaire's silence. His eyes remained fixed on the maid, whose hand still clutched the small receipt, like it was worth more than all the treasures money could buy. Why would you spend my money on them? He asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. She looked up, and for the first time, he truly saw her eyes. They were not the eyes of a servant. They were the eyes of someone who had carried pain, who had chosen compassion despite it. "Because you already have everything," she said, "and they have nothing. Isn't that what this card was supposed to mean? Freedom to choose? I chose to give them what I never had, what you never had." The billionaire swallowed hard, his throat tight. The associate rolled her eyes. "This is absurd. She wasted it. You don't become who you are by giving money to beggars." He turned sharply, his gaze like ice. "I didn't ask you to remind me who I am. I asked you to show me who you are." The room stilled. The socialite shifted uncomfortably, realizing the mood had shifted in a direction she could not control. For years, she had thrived on laughter, on her ability to charm wealthy men into showering her with gifts. But here, her usual sparkle was dimming. She leaned forward, her voice sugar-coated. "Darling, don't let this little act of charity fool you. You need someone who understands your world, who can walk beside you in it. That girl," she tilted her chin toward the maid, "she belongs in the background. She will never shine beside you." But the maid did not flinch. She didn't defend herself. She simply stood quietly, her gaze steady, her presence unshaken. That silence, more than anything, unsettled him. It wasn't weakness, it was strength. A strength he had nearly forgotten existed. He rose from his chair, slowly, deliberately. The weight of his footsteps echoed through the marble floors. He stood before the maid, the once invisible figure in his grand house, and for the first time bowed his head, not in submission, but in respect. "Tell me," he whispered, "what did you see when you looked at that card?" She hesitated, her voice low but clear. "I saw a chance to heal something broken, not with money, but with what money can do if it's used with love." Her words hit him like thunder. He had spent decades proving to the world that he was invincible, that money was power, that no one could hurt him again. But here was this woman reminding him of the truth he had buried. Power meant nothing if it couldn't heal the wounds it came from. The associate scoffed. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating you. You're a man of logic, not sentiment. Don't let her sob story cloud your judgment." But he didn't even turn to look at her. Instead, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: shame. Shame for every gala he had thrown while children shivered in the very orphanage he had left behind. Shame for every deal he had made while pretending he had built himself alone, forgetting the faces of those who once shared his hunger. The maid placed the photo frame gently on the table. "I didn't come here to win anything," she said softly. "I came back because I never stopped caring about where we came from. I thought maybe you hadn't either." His chest ached. The two other women sat stiff, realizing that whatever game they had walked into, they had lost. They had shown him greed, vanity, selfishness. She had shown him humanity. The billionaire stepped back, his mind swirling with thoughts, memories, and questions he hadn't dared to ask himself. Was this what his fortune had been missing all along? Not another skyscraper, not another deal, but the simple act of remembering where he came from? He stared out the window again, but this time the glittering skyline didn't look like triumph. It looked like a reminder of how far he had drifted from the boy in the photograph. Behind him, the silence stretched, heavy and unbroken, until finally he spoke. "You remind me," he said quietly, almost to himself, "that the heart can be bankrupt long before the wallet ever is." The maid lowered her gaze, humility still woven into every fiber of her being. But in that moment, she was no longer invisible to him. She was the mirror he had been too afraid to look into. The associate crossed her arms, furious at her failure, but too proud to admit defeat. The socialite plastered on a smile, trying to salvage her chances, but the billionaire no longer heard her laughter. He no longer cared for their glitter or their sharp words. For the first time in years, he felt something deeper than wealth, something raw and terrifying, a longing to make things right. He turned toward the maid once more, his voice heavy but firm. "Come with me tomorrow," he said. "We're going back to the orphanage." The words startled even him, but once they were spoken, he knew they could not be taken back. The maid's eyes widened, then softened. and for a moment he saw a flicker of the boy he once was reflected in her gaze. The other women sat in stunned silence, their carefully constructed facades crumbling in the weight of a truth they could neither buy nor fake. And for the billionaire, the night was only beginning to unravel a story he had long buried deep in the shadows of his empire. The next morning arrived with a quiet heaviness in the air. The billionaire's mansion, usually buzzing with activity, stood unnaturally still. For the first time in years, he dismissed the board meetings, the calls, and the endless stream of assistants reminding him of urgent matters. None of it mattered. His focus was fixed on a journey he had long avoided. The journey back to where it all began. A sleek black car waited outside, but inside it sat not a parade of associates or bodyguards, only him and the maid. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who carried the same past, though one had buried it and the other had carried it like a fragile flame. As the city's towering skyscrapers gave way to narrow streets and crumbling buildings, his chest tightened. The world around him transformed, polished glass and marble replaced by rusted gates and peeling walls. When the car finally pulled up before the orphanage, time seemed to halt. The building stood weary and frail, its walls faded, its windows cracked, its gates sagging on broken hinges. But what hurt him more than the sight of decay were the children. Barefoot, their clothes torn, their eyes wide with the same hunger and yearning he had once carried. They froze when the car door opened, staring at him as though he had stepped out of another universe. The maid walked ahead, her step steady, and the children ran to her, wrapping themselves around her legs with innocent familiarity. She laughed softly, kneeling to touch their faces, to reassure them. The billionaire stood a few steps away, his polished shoes suddenly feeling like they didn't belong on this ground. He felt their eyes on him, curious, distant, unsure. He was one of them once, and yet he had abandoned this place. An old caretaker shuffled forward, his back bent, his hair white. When he saw the billionaire, his eyes widened in disbelief. "It can't be. Is it really you?" The billionaire nodded faintly, his throat too tight to speak. The caretaker's lips trembled as he whispered, "I thought you had forgotten us forever." Those words pierced him deeper than any blade. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice out. "I did forget, and that was my greatest failure." He walked into the orphanage, each step echoing with ghosts of laughter, tears, and whispers from a childhood buried under billions of dollars. The sight was unbearable, broken beds with springs jutting out, damp walls stained with mold, books so tattered they barely held together. A child's cough echoed in the hall, sharp and weak. And then he saw it, his old bed. The frame was still there, rusted but recognizable, tucked into the corner where rain had always leaked through the roof. He reached out, touching the metal. For the first time in decades, tears welled in his eyes. He had slept there, dreamed there, promised himself that he would escape. But in escaping, he had left the others behind. The maid stood quietly beside him, her presence grounding him. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's not too late," she whispered. He turned to the children, their eyes filled with silent questions. Kneeling down, he met them at eye level. His voice broke as he said, "I was one of you. I slept in this very bed. I was hungry like you, forgotten like you. I swore I would come back, but I didn't. Until today." A hush fell over the room. The children blinked, as if trying to connect a man in a tailored suit with a boy who once shared their suffering. Then a small hand reached out and touched his, and with that simple gesture, the dam inside him broke. Tears rolled down his face freely, unashamed, cleansing decades of pride and emptiness. The billionaire stood again, his voice steady now, filled with a new fire. "This place will no longer be forgotten. I will rebuild it. Every wall, every bed, every book. You will have it all. You will eat, you will learn, you will dream, and you will never feel abandoned again." Gasps filled the room. The caretaker's eyes shone with tears. The maid's lips curved in the faintest smile, and the children's faces lit up with a spark they had never dared to hold before. Hope. In the weeks that followed, the world watched as the story spread. News outlets called it the billionaire's redemption. Cameras captured the sight of construction crews rebuilding the orphanage, turning the broken building into a sanctuary of light and learning. The once-forgotten children now laughed in brand-new classrooms, slept in warm beds, and ate at full tables. For them, life had transformed overnight. But for the billionaire, the true transformation was inside him. The associate who had spoken of assets and contracts never returned. The socialite who once promised joy faded into the circles of vanity she belonged to. They had been tested, and their hearts had failed. Only the maid remained, not for recognition, not for wealth, but because her compassion had never wavered. She walked beside him through every visit to the orphanage, guiding him, reminding him that true power was not in possession, but in generosity. One evening, after the new orphanage had been completed, he stood in the courtyard, watching the children play under the golden sunset. Their laughter rang out like music, pure and untainted. For the first time, he felt something no empire had ever given him: peace. The maid joined him quietly, her hands folded in front of her. He turned to her, his voice low. "Do you know what broke me that night? It wasn't the picture you bought, or even the things you gave them. It was the truth in your eyes. You reminded me of who I really was, and you showed me what it means to truly give." Her eyes softened. "You always had that in you. You just buried it under too much pain." He looked at her for a long moment, the weight of gratitude heavy in his heart. "If not for you, I would still be lost." The children's laughter grew louder, echoing across the courtyard, filling every corner with joy. He felt the sound seep into his soul, stitching wounds he thought would never heal. He realized then that wealth without compassion was emptiness, power without purpose was destruction, and life without love was nothing at all. That night, as he stood in the glow of the orphanage lights, the billionaire made a vow, not in secret, not in silence, but in his heart where it mattered most. He vowed that his empire would no longer be built only on steel and money, but on lives touched, dreams nurtured, and hearts healed. And as the stars appeared in the sky, the maid beside him, the children laughing around him, he finally understood something he had chased his whole life but never found in riches. He was home.